we have to be able to execute and invest at the same time. We have to be ambidextrous. We can't afford to do both. Soldiers have always been innovating, right? They're doing it with duct tape and all kinds of craziness. So what happens when we give them the right resources and then we scale those lessons learned with our partners or transition them? And so, the division didn't have a whole lot of resources, but we partnered with the Army Research Lab and their Catalyst Pathfinder program. We partnered with Vanderbilt. And then we started making connections with other organizations like the Close Combat Lethality Task Force, RICTO. So the example I'll give with the resources is something simple. Right when we opened, we had an infantry company commander and his assistant gunner teams come in. And they're like, hey, we have spent a bunch of money out of pocket trying to get the right bag for our ammo so that it's easier for air assault missions and then to emplace right away and pull the ammo straight out of the bag into the machine gun to save time, right? 5 seconds makes a really big difference when you're emplacing, in a critical time.
It's a long time in a gunfight.
Right. And so, they had tried a bunch of different things, spent their own personal money, which is crazy. And we had just opened. So my favorite part is when soldiers walk in and they're like, hey, I have this idea. I heard you can help. And you could just tell by the look on their face. They're like, oh, this is going to be some other goose chase. Somebody sent me to a place and they're not going to be able to help me. What can you help me with? And like, oh man, that's great. Like we have everything on hand. We have a maker space. Let's do it. Let's make it. And after a couple iterations of making it, and this is with resources that we got through the Army Research Lab. So there's one partner. And then after a couple iterations, they had it exactly how they wanted it to be. And they had tested it several times. And they're like, this is perfect. This is saving us. And then we reach out to the Close Combat Lethality Task Force. And they got a bunch of prototypes made at Picatinny. And so those are being used right now in exercises with the idea of that's my hope is now we take those lessons learned and then we could get them into the hands of all soldiers, not just a few from, at 82nd and the 101st.
Yeah, that's huge. How do you, you talk about sort of the challenge with scale, right? It's the same problem you have out in startup or in tech. Like you build a cool widget, you find a cool solution. Okay, great. How do I scale that like in a meaningful way? What are some of the barriers you've seen sort of doing? I mean, that's the exact example of what a lot of this innovation community should solve, right? Like, hey, found a way to make it suck less to deliver lethal effects, right? Hi, that's what the DoD does. But you seem to, every time you start to try to scale something, in my experience, I have found some fiefdom owner who's like, no, stay off my lawn. This is my program. These are my quad charts. I have been appointed the innovation officer. How do you sort of navigate some of that?
Sure. So
I feel like since you're getting out, we can speak a little freely.
It's hard for everyone in the military, in and out of the military.
Yeah.
What we've demonstrated with a lot of these grassroots innovation programs is that soldiers we can produce evidence for what is the right thing and what's the right way to build it. One of the things that blew my mind that I learned about as an innovation officer is that, and one of my mentors taught me this, Dr. Bull Holland. He was talking about the capability development documents, the CDDs. There's a place where you put the justification for the requirements, but you're not to develop that document. You're not required to put evidence to substantiate it with soldiers saying like, hey, here's what happened. It saved this many seconds, or this is why we need, or for example, like for targeting, especially when it comes to things like software, being able to define it through the outputs versus, hey, we need these technical specs. Well, why do we need those technical specs? Being able to focus on the outputs, making sure that we're measuring it properly. And so we've gotten to the point, okay, we know these are the right things. Soldiers have good ideas everywhere, right? But there's almost nobody in tactical units who understand the capability development process, the ecosystem, acquisitions, and without that exposure, or because we don't have an institutionalized mechanism for taking that voice and taking these ideas, testing them, and then taking those lessons learned and putting them into the system. It's something that we're just starting to scratch the surface on. We've gotten really good to, okay, hey, we've got like this, TRL 7, so technology readiness level 7, which means it's, been tested in a relevant environment. The unit is a relevant environment in this case. But now what? And we're just now starting to get there because one of the challenges is the institutional knowledge and operational units, right? It's not something that's taught. It's not something that they're exposed to. All of the different pathways and opportunities, how do things work? And then two, there's not that formalized system for connecting the operational unit with the other entities. I mean, there is some, right? Like they do soldier touch points.
I've seen slides that say there are, but I've not actually ever seen it in practice. And it's the same problem the department has, though. I think it's why there's maybe a glimmer of hope for the reorganization with DIU, where it now reports directly to SecDef instead of like the road to nowhere into R&E, right? You've got a problem at the tactical level. You've either got an internal entity with the capacity to get it to a TRL 7 or, some organization that has the widget.
Right.
And can immediately deploy it. But then where does it go?
Right.
Right? Like, do I call the Army Applications Lab and AFC? Like, we all know the answer to that is no. Like, they throw a good cocktail party every couple times a year. But like, I mean, I want to love them, but it's not really useful. Where do you go? Right? Like, how do you scale that? Is it RICTO? Is it? And the fact that, as you're naming partners, there's like 5 or 6 where we're looking for, that should also be problematic because that's putting a burden on that tactical unit instead of streamlining it and saying, hey, if we're seeing the right behaviors at the tactical edge, how do I cultivate and incentivize that? Should be, in theory, by providing a transparent and sort of structured pathway to then scale. We seem to do neither of those.
Right. We need, one, the right people who know how to facilitate it, how to do the curation, how to, where to go, what are the options. And we need a database. Yeah. We need something that keeps track of all of this. And, we're doing it at the unit level, which is really helpful because...
How do you track that across the enterprise? So that, like, if somebody at Drum or wherever has built the thing or solved a problem,
right? How
do you know at EagleWorks or at, I forget what it was called, at 18th Strike Works? What's it called?
The Airborne Innovation Lab is at the 82nd.
Yeah.
So, and we're doing that within the 18th Airborne Corps, where we have an innovation officer. And then we're doing these regular meetings and we're sharing all of these information. And it's amazing in the meetings. They're like, hey, I'm working on this, totally random project. And, oh, that's a problem with us. But we figured out by working with, with one of our university partners. Yeah. Or, I mean, that's really where the magic is.
That doesn't become like a tree that falls in the woods and no one hears. It's like,
right.
So you've got the discoverability of some of those tactical solutions and scale.
And these units are so overwhelmed with so much to do. Having a person who can look at the longer term, and when I say longer term for a unit, I'm talking like, 12 months, right? I'm not talking about the 6 years it takes to get, something start to finish and capability development cycle. And, but we have to be able to execute and invest at the same time. We have to be ambidextrous. We can't afford to do both.